The most unique casing ritual I've ever seen.
We opened on Yaiba and Gardos taking note of how the world itself was reacting to Tsurugi becoming a dual sword eyes.
Well, they gotta sell those star decks somehow.
At the same time, and while the Hulk Hogan clone was getting ready for his cringy as all hell WrestleMania moment, Amuro was continuing her talks with Queen Granada. In particular, they talked about how overly edgy her elder son was, which I thought was just kind of a given. Meanwhile, the younger son and his friends were figuring out what they should do about their little hostage situation. Tsurugi figured that he should turn himself in for the time being, as he did at least have a strong bargaining chip now that they had two eyes. However, that would be briefly tabled after the Red Army had taken their own hostage back in the last episode. This let the dual sword eyes share his intentions with Gordy, and also discuss why Yaiba even wanted the Sword of Judgment in the first place.
Better motivation than most modern Precure villains these days, at least.
But yeah, he ended up reiterating his whole looking at the world from all angles goal, which didn't seem to impress the evil general at first. However, Tsurugi managed to hold his attention with, of course, the thing that's in the title of the show. The game ended up playing out mostly how you'd expect, though notably with both battlers playing their Nexus or Nexi? Yeah, I don't know what the plural for that is. Though during the battle, they did try to learn more about each other. Tsurugi of course asked Gordy what he actually thought about his hometown, which he tried to avoid answering to. Eventually though, as the battle was nearing its end, the audience kind of got an answer, as he clearly still maintained fond memories of his little town. Most notably, he remembered the early days in Yaiba's court when they took that picture that had been hung in the inn. And in those days, he even seemed to be less of a cynical asshole like he currently was, which he even seemed to acknowledge. I like this setup because I think they're trying to leave it up for interpretation.
My personal interpretation is that he was too embarrassed to admit that he couldn't do much for his town after becoming one of Yaiba's generals.
I think he realized that, as is so often the case after you join a government, you can't just look to help only the little guy, or in this case, the little town anymore. They have to take an entire nation into consideration, which is understandable, even if in Gordy's case, he ended up losing track of those he originally wanted to support the most. Though that problem only ended up being amplified under Yaiba's current rule with its tunnel vision goal of attaining the Sword of Judgment. As a result, Gordy became the trolly, cynical asshole he was now, if only to cope with the fact that he couldn't help his town outside of some shadier dealings, like giving them massive reimbursements for the damage they were causing through their battles with the Eyes of Light.
That's what I really like about the show. There's hardly any clear-cut villains.
When you get down to it, guys like Gordy and Brow are victims of a broken societal system that has forced them to answer to a misguided king who's slowly allowing his kingdom to collapse under him. Deep down, they all want some sort of reform to better the lives of their people, but wouldn't be able to do it unless they had some wider perspectives, which Tsurugi was more than willing to provide, after he completely defeated Gordy with his Dark Tyrannosaurus combo on his ace card. Meanwhile though, we had gotten to see what had become of Hakuwa and Sora after they ran into the one actually obviously evil dude in this show.
Considering how much I hate this trope, I am kind of leaning towards the latter.
That said, and as we'll see in this next episode, it's not a big deal, as at the very least, it doesn't become a major plot point that feels dragged out. Speaking of which, this episode ended with the revelation that Amurello's father was in fact a soldier in the Red Army. With that, we entered into the 32nd episode, with Gordy having joined the protagonist's side somewhat hesitantly.
Oh, come on. There's nothing to be afraid of. I won't finish that sentence.
And as originally planned, Tsurugi turned himself in order to have an audience with his older brother, as well as save his friends, not realizing they had gotten a case of the edgelords.
Yeah, just give him a magical girl and everything will be fine. Yeah, more on that in another video.
Tsurugi tried to get them to properly release his friends by, surprisingly enough, using the most diplomatic way possible by affirming that he was indeed an Eye of Darkness like his brother. Yeah, he actually took a rather mature approach by not forcing anything and even refusing to take back his light deck and sword as a means of further proving his resolve as an Eye of Darkness.
Again, I really like Tsurugi as a main character, as he's not your typical shonen who's just gonna go in guns a-blazing, but rather one who actively is always trying to find the middle ground.
And he would even be rewarded for this, as Yaiba did agree to at least tell him why he wanted the Sword of Judgment. We'd follow up on this a little later in the episode. With that though, the rest of this would focus on Amarello and her thing with the queen.
Well, if Precure's taught me anything, the power of Yuri is almighty.
This would be useful, as Hakuwa had arrived to try and take Suo back to Riwore. Thus, we finally got to see the Damimami in action.
I see what you're doing there, animators, and I appreciate it.
Kizakura had also arrived to witness her counterpart battle, and interestingly enough, even though she was supposed to be the dark user, Amarello's deck played a lot more actual healing effects, like Gato Plepis, a spirit that let her receive extra lives every time it dealt damage to the opponent's life. Granted, it matched well with the characters' personalities, as Kizakura was a trickster who would use more bounce effects, while Amarello was more focused on protecting her queen, so she created a deck more focused around defenses, or in this case, life. It also might have symbolized the power she had gotten from Granada that was able to heal Garadoso's influence. This came in handy as the battle winded down, and she managed to pull off her Sword Brave combo, which as Gordy put it best, was pretty OP. First, her Chaos Pegasaurus actually had an effect befitting a Dark Spirit, in that in place of letting a player regain a life, instead the opponent would lose a life, essentially like a reverse healing. This synergized well with her Sword Brave Twilight Fantasia, which was especially broken, as it let the wielder stand if the opponent blocked its attack. Granted, it would still need to overcome the opponent, and Hakua's Kugel Horn was stronger, but she also had spells like 2 copies of Divine Field to up its power. Hakua did have the option to counter with Spirit's effect that could negate spells, but his true inner self stopped it, even though it probably wouldn't have mattered, as in order to activate that effect, he would have to remove cores from the Kugel Horn, which would also reduce its level, thereby decrease its power a lot more than what Amarello's pony was gaining. Whatever, they were mostly just kind of doing it for dramatic effect. And regardless, she managed to free Hakua, and left the heroes confused about her allegiances, as she was seemingly fighting for both sides. With that, the episode ended with the brothers being a descending weirdo from the heavens.
These episodes really show a good job of how to handle antagonists with layers to them.
While Gordy was actually kind of fine as just a gag villain, him showing that he does have people he wants to protect was surprisingly touching. Similarly, and while it was kind of obvious who Amarello was really trying to protect, it was just awesome to finally see her battle.
I mean, I still like my pure, unrepentant villains, which a certain someone in this show more than fulfills that role, but at the same time, it never hurts to have a few more antagonists with some more complex motivations.
I think another thing I really like about this show is how it handles payoffs. From the beginning of the series, stuff like Gordy's relationship with his hometown and Amarello's loyalty to Granada were all hinted at, and both ended up playing into some significant developments for these antagonists. Of course, it would have been understandable, and maybe even ignorable, if Gordy had just remained an unrepentant villain throughout the series, and yet they took the extra steps in actually giving him some complexity and conflicting emotions, likely born from feelings of inadequacy. Meanwhile, and in spite of Amarello being a bit more of a background character, she still managed to stand out thanks to this little setup of her having conflicting loyalties. Helps that she actually had one of the most solid decks amongst the Eyes of Darkness that also did a good job representing her moralities. She wants to help heal people, but wasn't above being a little prickly and poisonous like a rose. She's just a plain cool character who, as we'll see, has some other interests beyond just her queen. But yeah, overall, these were just good episodes for fleshing out the antagonists who have gotten a little less focus in this show. You don't have to make your villains the most complex characters ever, you just have to make them a little interesting, and a little fan service doesn't hurt either.
Thank you for watching, and I hope everyone out there is surviving some of these hotter summer months.
Temperatures are rising, so do stay hydrated, and maybe cool yourself down with some good shows, which we are kind of planning on covering in the next couple of weeks or so.
Look forward to it. Until then, though, for now, my friends, and if you'll excuse me, I think I searched someone wants her daily cheese.